lots of people will be pressing on you, and it won't happen in this budget in any event, but a future government will be pressed, whether you're at its head or otherwise, on the question of what to do with the Apple billions. And lots of people, including people like Michael O'Leary, I was reading while I was away, had plans, a big bridge across Dublin Bay, etc., etc. Everybody wants to spend that money. Isn't there a good logic, though, behind spending the money on something very significant? In other words, this is legacy money. It should endow a legacy project.
In principle, yes, but I think what legacy is a matter for debate. So let me say a couple of things. I mean, firstly, this money won't be received by the government, by the Exchequer, for about 6 months. Secondly, what do we know? It can't be spent on day to day. So, I'm even hearing interesting ideas coming out of opposition thinking that just can't happen, because you can't spend this money on recurrent day-to-day spending, because as you imply, you only get it once, right?
Yeah.
So you can only invest it and you can only spend it once. I've already heard proposals to spend it 10 times and it's not even 10 o'clock in the morning, right? So what can you spend it on? Well, you can spend it on things that are called one-off. So you can absolutely invest it in infrastructure. You can absolutely invest it in capital. And I think that's the space we should be looking at. So we have very, very, very serious constraints in Ireland when it comes to infrastructure and when it comes to things that make us competitive. In other words, make sure we can have jobs in our country into the future and keep our country prosperous. We're not where we need to be when it comes to energy, when it comes to our grid for electricity. We're not where it needs to be when it comes to water supply, and we're not where it needs to be when it comes to housing supply. And there are three areas that I think you could have a significant and exciting conversation about how you would harness this once-off windfall for our country. And then, without getting too technical about it, you'd ideally try and do as much of that as possible in a way that is off balance sheet. In other words, it doesn't affect your day-to-day budgetary cap. So I think that's the initial direction of travel that I'd like to see happen. What we should not do, what would be utterly disastrous for this country, is if the next general election is debased in terms of having a debate about how everyone spends the money over and over and over again, and kind of electioneering and auctioneering in relation to it. It's utterly irresponsible, and it couldn't be delivered anyway. What can be delivered is investment in infrastructure, and infrastructure does include housing for our people.
Would you be tempted at all by the possibility of the Apple Underground? In other words, finally build a decent metro for Dublin and call it the Apple Underground. That's my tuppence worth.
Well, thank you for your suggestion, which I'll put in the log list of suggestions we receive. But look, we are obviously going to deliver a metro project, and we're certainly not going to name it after any company.
Yeah. Although, there's nothing wrong with naming a GAA ground after a company. So what about any piece of infrastructure? And bridges are named after politicians all the time. So anyway, what's in a name?
What's in a name? But look, this is a sovereign state. We'll deliver our own infrastructure. We'll deliver it based on the tax revenues our country receives. But I do believe, we now have finality in relation to Apple. I've heard many people say, I've heard a bit of disingenuous commentary in recent days that you could have had this money years ago if you hadn't taken the case. That is, of course, baloney to anybody who looks at the issue, because Apple were already taking the case. So there wouldn't have been a finality to this case any quicker, regardless of whether the state participated or didn't participate. But by the state participating, we have stood by foreign direct investment, and we've stood by jobs in the country. And remember, there's 6,000 people in this country getting out of bed this morning and heading to work in Apple. There's hundreds of thousands of people getting out of bed this morning and going to work in multinational companies. So multinationals, foreign direct investment matters to this country, and therefore that was the rationale behind defending the independence of our revenue. But it's very much a legacy case.